On the cover of reporter Mark Bergen's recent book, it says he will take the reader, quote, inside YouTube's chaotic rise to world domination, unquote. Bergen has reported on Google for the past 7 years. YouTube was bought by Google in 2014 for $1.6 billion. In Mark Bergen's prologue, he reports that more than 2 billion people visit YouTube every month, making it the second most visited search engine on Earth. Google is first. Bloomberg reporter Bergen writes that YouTube is still dominated by music, gaming, and kids video. Mark Bergen, at the front of your book, you have a quote from somebody by the name of Logan Paul, and you have quote marks around it saying, "We found a dead body in the Japanese suicide forest, YouTube 2017. The quote is, "It was going to be a joke. This was all going to be a joke. Why did it become so real?" What's that about?
This was one of the most pivotal moments for YouTube as a company, and I think just really resonated where the whole mission of YouTube was to, they said, broadcast yourself, give everyone sort of a platform to become broadcasters. And for the first decade plus of the company, there were very few lines about sort of what was deemed responsible and respectable. And here you had Logan Paul, who was at the time one of the most popular, and still is popular YouTubers, and as mainstream celebrity who can launch his career on this platform. He showed a video that depicted someone like hanging from a suicide, and it was something where he posted it online. It was a viral hit. It was over the holidays when a lot of people at the company were not working, and it became one of these flashpoints where they had this sort of existential moment. They realized we can't just give these young people carte blanche to post whatever they want, right? There are repercussions, and they have to really change the rules and how it operates. And it was just this, I thought it was this really fascinating moment of like modern celebrity, where we feel this need to kind of document everything, including the death of another human being.
How do you personally use YouTube?
How do I personally? I think I use it probably, I'm in my sort of late 30s, I'd say, like a lot of people my age and older, as a utility, right? I use it to, I will look up recipes. During the pandemic, I watched a lot of like exercise videos to try to stay in shape. I use it to watch I'm a big basketball fan. I use it to watch a lot of free clips and highlight reels of basketball games. I think that is a way that a large swath of the population use the site. I don't use it like necessarily like a lot of people younger than me do, which is as a entertainment platform, as a news platform, as sort of an all-encompassing. I don't necessarily follow YouTube creators the way I think that of the younger generation does.
For someone that has never thought about it, maybe never watched it, what is it? What is YouTube?
YouTube is many things. I mean, it is the world's, and has been for a long time, the world's biggest video platform. It's owned by Google, and I think it's really critical to think of it as Google for video, right? It is in much the same way that Google kind of organizes the entire web. YouTube is basically created that, where you have a video on sort of every subject imaginable. And so it is this incredibly valuable archive. It is entertainment. It is the world's biggest music library. It's the world's probably the biggest podcasting library. It's certainly the biggest kids entertainment platform. And I think I make the case in the book, it is the company that has shaped the future of the direction of like the internet commerce and like the sort of social media, not just as a phenomenon, but as a business.
Where is it physically located?
YouTube is in San Bruno, California. So it's been there since early on. It was when it was acquired by Google in 2006. They had an office there. And Google has, for the most part, YouTube has its own separate headquarters. its own chief executive, and its own office culture that's a little bit separate from Google. But I talk about in the book, they're very closely intertwined.
How long has Susan Wojcicki run run YouTube? And eventually I want to get to the garage story, but how long has she run it, and what makes her qualified to run it?
So Wojcicki has run YouTube since early 2014. She is probably one of the most central and important people in Google history. I think arguably one of the most powerful, influential women in Silicon Valley. Google was started in her garage, so she had a connection with the founders of Google, a personal connection. She was also one of the earliest employees there, their first marketer. There's certainly like people who, at the time when she was appointed, there were people that were very surprised by that appointment. She has no background in media. She'd never run a company that like YouTube, right? It's an advertising business, but it's also the world's largest media business. But she had at Google spent most of her time before then working on its what we think of as kind of display advertising business. So all the little banner ads that you see on any website you visit are likely powered by Google. And YouTube's business is in many ways just taking that model where Google sprays advertisements all across the internet, and they're just applying that to video. And so she was very qualified to run an advertising business. And from Google's perspective, that's what that YouTube needed to be for it. Before she took over, YouTube was kind of bleeding money. And so she was brought in to help make it a profitable business.
How much money total did they make last year?
Last year, I believe it was the 28 billion in advertising revenue. So what we don't, that's what they've disclosed is just their advertising revenue. We don't know. YouTube also has a premium service where people will pay like $10 a month to have access to certain features, no ads, a music service. They have an over-the-top TV cable package alternative called YouTube TV. They don't disclose how much money they make from those subscriptions, but I think most estimates are that that's pretty marginal. So I think probably close to around 30 billion.
You open your book, the prologue, with the name Haji Daoud Nabi. Who is he, and why did you start with that?
He was one of 51 victims of the Christchurch massacre in 2019.
In New Zealand?
In Christchurch, New Zealand,
yeah.
Right. It was one of, tragically, something that's become very familiar to us. It was a mass shooting executed by an avowed white supremacist. And it was tied into YouTube for several reasons. One is that the shooter in that case actually had a body camera that he broadcast the shooting, which is this just unbelievable horror that no one inside YouTube, I think, ever anticipated that their service would be used this way. There was also New Zealand government did an analysis after the shooting and talked to the shooter and discovered that a lot of his worldview was shaped by the videos that he watched on YouTube. And so it was a pivotal moment for the company that's, I think, still reckoning with that. And I think for society that is trying to understand how these platforms like YouTube that have transformed our lives in the past 2 decades, what real world impact they have. And I wanted to start with that story, and I wanted to start with the victims and sort of center them in the book.
Did he have it attached to YouTube on a live basis when he did it?
He was actually streaming on Facebook Live, which is which Facebook set up to compete with YouTube, and then the video sort of jumped pretty quickly. It seemed like people were re-uploading the footage onto YouTube.
How did it change YouTube's life after that happened?
So the primary way is that after that they readjusted what they called their hate speech rules, and so they've been under criticism for certainly externally in the press, in the U.S. Congress and Europe. What I talk about in the book was there's a lot of criticism inside the company that no one really I think outside understood, that the YouTube, just the way it's structured, the way that they recommend videos, the way that they're the way that they drive people to watch kind of consistently, and they really reward, their system tends to reward outrage and extreme videos. was propagating these white nationalist beliefs. And so they, after the Christchurch shooting, they took an action where they like a lot, they became much more strict about certain types of views that they see as discrimination around race and around ethnicity. They outlawed what they kind of deem uh, denying well-documented violent events. And so the most classic example is the Holocaust, right? There were, before this time, if you went on YouTube and said the Holocaust didn't happen, that was fine. That video could continue to stay on YouTube, and in many ways, some ways you can make money from that video. It could be promoted from their algorithm. After that, the company decided they rewrote their policies to say you can no longer do that, and other different cases like that. And I think, since then they've had a hard time. Writing rules in their guidebook is one thing, but enforcing them and sort of identifying, where people cross the line in the video, that is just an ongoing problem that they're never really going to solve.
I've got a couple of clips to run. The next one that I am going to run is supposedly the top music selection seen by something like run by 11 billion times. I wouldn't know about this if it wasn't for one of the players for the Washington Nationals who took this idea and became, during the World Series game back in 2019, became a big deal. I'm going to run it. It's a bit of a jolt for people who've never heard it. It's just about 39 seconds and then get you to talk about it.
Daddy shark, daddy shark, daddy shark, daddy shark. Let's go hunt, let's go hunt, let's go hunt, let's go hunt.
Mark Bergen, what is that?
That's the song that's going to be stuck in my head for the rest of the day. That is, I believe it holds the record for the most viewed. You know what? In my research, I think I found a video. This is just a sort of the marvel of YouTube. I believe it was 10 hours that song on repeat, and that exists on YouTube. It's been watched many times, and I think it suggests that how YouTube has become the de facto babysitter for a lot of people. So. The company, I talk about this in the book. It's really fascinating history where, for like many sites on the internet, commercial internet, they, from their onset, in the fine print said we're a site for people over 13, because there were rules about the data you can collect around minors, and so YouTube's lawyers and their founders decided we're not going to go after children because that's a whole regulatory complication. Where most of the internet's like really unregulated, which is what Silicon Valley kind of prefers. That became, about a decade ago, really hard to ignore when you started this. A lot of creators discovered that YouTube, as a free service, you have the iPad, was invented in 2010. It was just a phenomenal way to entertain children. And there are all sorts of new types of creativity. I won't necessarily say about the quality of Baby Shark. It seems like an innocent song. It's certainly not educational, but is it a reflection of, it's sort of like children's TV, but as I discovered in research, children's TV has been regulated, and there are certain, at least on broadcast television, there has to be a certain amount of educational programming, and there has to be a certain amount of you can't have overtly commercial messages and child labor. There are child labor laws. None of that existed on YouTube. And so within a few years, there was this explosion of content directed towards young children, often made by young children, really as a kind of Wild West with no rules and very little oversight.
Let's say that you and I want to start a channel and we want to get the advertising in it, we want to make some money. How do we do it?
It's harder to do now. For a long time, starting a decade in 2012, it was fairly easy. We would start a channel, we'd make videos, and as long as that we didn't violate copyright rules, kind of taking, as long as we didn't kind of just pirate videos from a TV show or a movie, we were pretty much cleared to post on YouTube, and it was fairly easy to make money from their advertising system. So every dollar that a marketer gives YouTube, YouTube pays out 55 cents to the video creator that ad runs on. If the ad runs, often you see it before a video, sometimes in the middle of a video. That changed. We talked about at the beginning, Logan Paul, that incident with in Japan. That was one of the several moments where YouTube sort of unruly stars misbehaves in ways that the company had to change the way that their financial system works. And so now it's much harder. You have to hit a certain threshold of subscribers and views in order to make money.
But how do we, let's say you and I form a company and we want to get on YouTube, do we talk to a human being or do you do it all online?
Oh God, no, just go. You upload the video in their system and it's there.
How do you do that though? Is there a guidance somewhere that tells you exactly how to do that?
Yeah, but I think that there's certainly cottage industries now that can walk you through the basics, in the sort of how to. You can watch a YouTube video that shows you and then how to do that, and the tricky part is not necessarily uploading video, which is relatively simple. It's the tricky part is getting an audience. Like we could post this video and then, I can send it and maybe my mother would watch it, but in order to get an audience, that is something that even the best YouTubers don't necessarily have the formula for that. And by now it's a very crowded. Like there are just millions of YouTubers that are over 2 million are making money on the platform. Millions and more are trying to make money. It is an incredibly crowded place. Is
it all done? Say, for instance, if you're making money, you just get a check in the mail?
Effectively, yeah. YouTube is basically one of the biggest internet economies ever created, and so it comes out cuts a monthly check based on your the number of ads that you run, and a formula that's relatively the ads are very like television. They have varying costs. If you have if you're making educational videos, you tend to get better ad rates because advertisers are more willing to sponsor that. But some of if you're it really depends on it's all sort of a secret formula. And to be very clear, like YouTube as a company doesn't provide a lot of transparency around this. Like unless you're a really big star, it is hard to even get in touch with a customer support representative there, right? Google tends to favor systems that work on software and machines rather than having to hire a bunch of call support. And so it's a very opaque system.
Tiny little thing, when you watch anything on YouTube, there are two different ways that commercials are coming. One, the little block in the corner, after 5 seconds you can get rid of the ad, or the ad is there and you have to see the whole thing. What's the difference between those two, and what makes money for you if you've got something, a channel or whatever you have on YouTube?
Yeah, the one you described is actually, it's called a skippable ad, and it does precisely that. And it's sort of remarkable. I still struggle with this, to think about how many people will not, if I see that, I'm skipping too, right? It's sort of the way that YouTube system works is the advertiser only pays if someone does not skip, if someone watched the entire ad. This was something that YouTube invented, this format, and it's been they don't disclose this data, but from what we can understand, it's done remarkably well. And I think what happens there is they're able to charge higher rates. And the example that someone at YouTube, a former executive, told me, it's imagine that Nike makes this commercial that everyone kind of wants to watch. It's a really, we've all seen, like, these. Nike is a good example. These sports companies can make really compelling advertisements, commercials. If they make an ad that very few people are skipping, then Adidas will want to pay more to get in front of viewers with their ad. And so and YouTube is not, these are not necessarily happening with sort of like in the television world with handshake agreements. This is an automated system with algorithms that are set up to, on YouTube side, make as much money as possible from these ads. And so often in case the skippable ads tend to be the most expensive if you're an online creator. the most rewarding.
Who's PewDiePie?
PewDiePie. PewDiePie is the YouTube handle for a Swedish YouTuber and video game streamer, mostly Felix Kjellberg. He was for a long time, for about a decade, starting in 2012, the most successful and probably one of the most like handsomely rewarded, the wealthiest YouTubers. And he has gone through a series of controversies with the company, starting kind of right around the Trump election, with the videos that many accused of being anti-Semitic, and problematic and hateful. And he's been one of the most fascinating, because of that relationship, the way that he has had all sorts of headaches and problems for YouTube, and yet he has a devoted audience, and is been this personification of the new type of celebrity that YouTube wanted to invent, and in many ways has invented. And I think he's at the center of many of YouTube's major issues of the past decade.
How did he start? Did they know him at YouTube when he started?
No, he was one of hundreds of, not thousands of. I think he was in college kids that was uploading video games. He plays video games. This is what he mostly did. He would play a video game, and then he would stick a web camera on his face, and do kind of color commentary, kind of like what you imagine when you're watching a baseball game. And this was a genre that took off on YouTube for a couple of reasons. One, people are entertained by it. Two is it's fairly cheap. Like there's not a lot of editing required. You don't need a green screen. You don't need a script, screenwriters. It is just one person, a camera, and a video game.
We have a little clip. You can't see him, and that's, I suspect, half the thing that makes it interesting. But you can just hear it. It's about a minute long. PewDiePie, PewDiePie, and this is something called the dumbest deaths in history, and it's from 2021. He had 3.9 million views. Here it is, and I'll get your comment afterwards.
Dumb ways to die. So many dumb ways to die.
Yeah!
Back with a new camera, new mic, shaved face, ready to rate some dead people's deaths. This is called Victims of the 1518's Dance Plague. Excuse me, what? This is an historical event in the Holy Roman Empire. Now wait, I thought you were talking about... Oh, it happened many times. Dance plagues are a thing, we gotta watch out. Okay, another death from laughter. This dude was Italian. Who is it? Alright, this joke is off the hook, man. This gotta be some Pickle Rick level. Okay, let's hear this joke. He died from laughing too much at an obscene joke during a meal in Venice. That's it? What was the joke? It was so funny, no one lived to tell the tale. Hans Steininger. Look at this dude! Look at that man's beard. Hell yeah. He died from his beard. He died when he broke his neck by tripping over his own beard.
I'm not sure it would help you to see it. What age group watches PewDiePie?
That's a good question. I mean, we don't know. I think they're estimates. I think it's safe to assume it's probably in the 12 to 24 age range.
What do they like about it?
I think there are a couple things. One, if you saw the clip, he was sort of basically like going around Wikipedia, right? And this is like, he is sort of part of this generation of YouTubers that often makes videos about the internet and about the internet culture. And I think one of my theories that I kind of developed from talking to people inside the company is like, the internet is, and YouTube is just it can be a very befuddling, confusing place. And it's certainly like, I am a professional journalist that covers tech and social media, and I am often very confused about the trends and the phenomenons that happen, right? And if you have someone like what PewDiePie often does is he kind of becomes this navigator of online culture, a translator, and he's also driving it in many ways. And so I think that's entertaining when people can have someone to kind of guide them around. I mean, he's clearly like he's an online comic and presents himself that way. What I think is also unique is that, you know, unlike a reality TV star or a television star, he often reveals, you know, you saw at the beginning of that clip how he was talking about just that he shaved his face, right, and that he bought new equipment. You know, even though PewDiePie is not his real name, most people, sociologists will call this a parasocial relationship, where the fans, they don't know him, they've never met Felix Schellberg, the human being, but they feel like they know him, and they have this, they're invested in his success and his performance as an online creator in a way that I don't think it really happened in media before. It doesn't happen with other types of celebrity and reality TV, and that with that has this, you know, can create new business models where he can tell fans to buy a certain item and they're going to go out and buy it. And it has a dark side, which is when he is making choices that have big societal risks. He has a lot of fans and that are extremely devoted to him and are going to become like trolls, and he calls them the bro army. And we've seen that become very misogynistic and have this sort of toxic underbelly.
Has he ever been sued?
Oh, good question. Not that I'm aware of.
And is he still active?
He is still active. He is no longer he kind of lost the crown as he was for a long time the most subscribed. He was a YouTuber with the most subscribers. He lost that. I believe it's now sort of, there are three different new kings of YouTube. One is a Bollywood entertainment channel, one is a kids channel, and the third is a creator named Mr. Beast.
I got online this morning and looked at Mr. Beast. What's the attraction there, do you think? Can you explain what he does?
Sure. Mr. Beast is a really interesting new phenomenon. He's sort of like reality TV for the YouTube generation. He is largely famous for his sort of stunts of excess. He will do something kind of, these are reality TV formats, right? But he will have a contest where he has, you know, one I'm just thinking of, maybe a dozen people putting their hands on a really expensive car, and the last person to keep their hand on the car will get to keep the car. Or he will pretend to be an Uber driver, and then at the end of the Uber ride, he gives the person in the car who took the ride with him this really nice Tesla, right? Like he does these, and sometimes they're charities. He will film himself trapped inside of a box for 24 hours. Like these are formats that have been proven successful on reality TV. He is part of this generation. He's been on YouTube since he was making videos on YouTube since he was 12 years old. I think he's maybe 24 now. And he does it sort of, he spends a lot of money, he has a pretty major media business to make these videos, and it ends up becoming like fairly profitable.
C-SPAN has, a lot of C-SPAN's material has ended up on YouTube. Now we have a channel which we have an arrangement, you know, like we were talking about earlier, but an enormous amount of our material finds its way to YouTube, and we didn't give anybody permission to do that. Mm-hmm. How often has that happened? And at some point, I want you to tell us about the Viacom suit, because I suspect it's all wrapped up in that.
Yeah, I mean, this was a problem that emerged pretty early on with YouTube. One of the one that the staff struggled to sort of stamp out was WWE wrestling became, where fans were just would pirate the videos and put them up without permission. And so, you know, the fundamental issue, and you brought up the Viacom lawsuit. So the Viacom sued YouTube for $1 billion for copyright infringement in March of 2007, which was a few months after Google purchased YouTube. And the fundamental issue that Viacom claimed was that YouTube was knowingly allowing Viacom, and Viacom owned MTV, Comedy Central, Nickelodeon, allowing their shows to be re-uploaded without their permission and then making money from them. And the copyright law in the US basically makes it very clear that you can't sort of have commercial success from pirated footage. What YouTube built in probably the most successful sort of technology that they've made is something called Content ID that automatically, you know, C-SPAN, for instance, C-SPAN, we can go in and upload their footage, and then YouTube the way it's supposed to work is that every time someone goes around C-SPAN and say uploads footage without the station's permission, then YouTube will alert the copyright owner and say, we found this video footage here. And you have two options. You can take it down, or request to remove it, or you can just make money from the ads that run. And that is an arrangement that has worked very well for YouTube, because a lot of media companies are interested in, they're fine with having the material remain on YouTube. It is successful. It is a very good marketing channel. And then they end up making all the money from the ads anyway. And so I think because of that, because of Google has incredibly well-paid and savvy lawyers, they were able to fend off the Viacom lawsuit and basically keep YouTube in existence because of that system in place.
Is there any way I get online to see if I can find how many servers they have to be able to do this, billions and billions of hours? I found, and I'm sure I never quite trust these numbers, but I found that there were something like 36 locations around the world. What are your numbers, and do you have any idea how many servers they've had to buy to service this institution?
Yeah, YouTube is so intertwined with Google on the sort of back end technology that I think it's hard for us to say. As far as I understand, it's not like Google has data centers across the world, dozens of them, and I think some of their systems are. It's not like have one piece of machinery that's designed just to compress YouTube video footage and another piece of machinery that's designed to work on its search engine, right? It's sort of all part of the same overarching technology and system. So I think, to answer your question, I think YouTube would have a lot more servers if it wasn't part of Google. Google is the world's most effective technology company at sort of squeezing out efficiency from their machines and their operate like they have for a long time. But YouTube was bleeding money because it's more expensive to basically host this free video and so much of it. And so it was basically Google's successful advertising business was subsidizing the YouTube machinery, like YouTube service. So I don't have a good answer for you as far as the exact number.
Who do you credit for figuring out the advertising part of all this?
I think so. There was a CEO. So Susan Wojcicki was certainly has helped YouTube's business grow, not necessarily from zero, but from close to zero to what it is today. And she also navigated, for almost a year in 2017, you saw the biggest advertisers on the platform boycotting the service over extremist videos. And she is, if you're a shareholder in Google, you're very happy with her ability to get advertisers to come back and to build a pretty sustainable business from that. I think there's credit before her. There was a chief executive named Salar Kamangar, and his deputy Shishir Malhotra were the two that most people at the company sort of credit for taking it from an unprofitable business into something in shape for profitability.
I want to ask you about the individuals who started it, but first about you. Give us your background. What part of the country did you come from originally? Where did you go to school, and what were your first jobs?
Oh, wow. Wasn't prepared to answer that. I'm from Columbus, Ohio. I went to school nearby in the College of Worcester, which is in northeastern Ohio. I believe YouTube was started when I was a sophomore or junior in high school, or college rather. And I was trying to remember like the first time I remember encountering videos, but and my first job was actually delivering the local newspaper in Columbus, the Columbus Dispatch. Maybe that started my interest in journalism. I have been covering Google primarily since 2015.
But you went on from Worcester to the University of Chicago. What did you study there?
Oh yeah, I studied public policy, and still have an interest in the intersection of business and policy.
When did you decide you wanted to be in this writing business and covering news?
Good question. I think I decided around the financial crisis, and then I had to figure out how to make a living doing it. It was around the financial crisis was a moment where I I thought that this, being able to, I was really inspired by explanatory journalism that could unpack something like as complex as the housing crash. And I thought that was a really interesting, something I wanted to do professionally. And I ended up chasing that I spent my formative years as a journalist working in India. And that's actually how I started writing about the technology industry.
For how long were you in India?
For about 2 years.
And you live where today?
I'm in the Bay Area, and have been there for 7 years, and with a publication called Recode, and then Bloomberg, writing about Google, the parent company Alphabet, and during that time, YouTube became just a bigger and bigger part of Google's business, and this much more prominent and complicated part of their like political and societal issues.
Who would not talk to you for this book?
Susan Wojcicki, one. I did not get an interview with Susan, who's the chief executive. I don't have a good answer for you why that is. I've written some, I think, fair but critical stories about the company for Bloomberg, including about some of the decisions that she made and its impact on sort of not listening to advice about their systems and their metrics.
I've got a clip of her. She's a Harvard graduate. During this time with Google and with YouTube, she's had 5 children. And you can tell, doesn't her husband work for Google?
Her husband, as far as I know, still works for Google, yes.
Just want everybody to hear her voice. And she's talking about something that I will ask you to follow up on. Let's listen to Susan Wojcicki.
As soon as the war broke out, we realized this was an incredibly important time for us to get it right with regard to our responsibility. And we made a number of really, really tough decisions. One of them involved how we handled Russian state-sponsored media. We had lots of requests from various governments, but looking at our policy framework, we also decided to suspend that media globally. We also extended our policies with regard to how we handle verified violent events. The reason we are still serving in Russia, and we believe that that is important, is that we're able to deliver independent news into Russia. And so the average citizen in Russia can access for free the same information that you can access here from Davos, which we believe is really important to be able to help citizens know what's going on and have perspectives from the outside world.
What else can you tell us about her background and how she got to where she is?
Yeah, I mean, so Wojcicki is the child of 2 exceptional parents. Her father was a professor at Stanford. Her mother has taught journalism actually for a long time in Palo Alto. Her one sister is a fairly accomplished doctor. Her sister Anne started and runs 23andMe, a genetics company. And so Anne was, for a while, married to Sergey Brin, who was one of the co-founders at Google. This is, I think, by way of setting up, it is, many people at Google talk to me about how, Susan Wojcicki is an accomplished executive. She is competent as a manager. She clearly, is successful in the digital advertising world. I think it's really important to understand that she is close, has a familial closeness to the Google founders, and so another people that didn't speak to me with the Google founders, and Larry Page and Sergey Brin have not spoken to a journalist, I think, in 7 years. So I wasn't too offended, but they're no longer involved day to day with the company, but they're still the majority shareholders of Alphabet, which is Google's parent company. And they're still the owners of this incredibly important company, and they've been longtime decision makers there. They became fabulously successful and wealthy before they were 30, and have a close, tight-knit group of people that they trust and are loyal to them. They turn to counsel, and Susan Wojcicki is there. And I think that's a major explanation. At the time, Larry Page was CEO of Google when he appointed Susan Wojcicki to run YouTube. And from everyone I've spoken to who was around that time, it was in part to keep her there at the company, and he wanted to put someone that he trusted in that role.
Susan Wojcicki's garage and the three people that started YouTube, how did that come together, and how is it that they rented 2,000 square feet in her garage?
Oh, yeah. So these were the founders of Google that rented space in her garage.
YouTube that's right. I'm sorry. I'm confused. Yeah, I'm definitely confused with all these names, but go ahead.
That's okay. It was through a friend, Sergey Brin, who married her sister, had a connection there. And so that was, Google's history was both Google and YouTube started in garages. The saying in Silicon Valley is that even if you're very successful like Google, you're always worried about the next startup starting in a garage. And I think in many ways, YouTube was, Google had a competing service called Google Video that Susan Wojcicki was involved with running at the time in 2005. It was not doing well compared to YouTube. YouTube was taking off and a lot of young people. It was really popular. At the time, it was sort of, it's hard for us to imagine, but this was a time when MySpace was very popular. So MySpace and YouTube were the kind of hottest things in tech. YouTube was also a very popular search destination. So people were going to youtube.com to search for things like how-to videos or just like entertainment, instructions. This to Google was a threat. And oftentimes in history of Silicon Valley, it is you either try to squash your competition or you buy them. And so Google decided to buy them.
So what garage did the three founders of YouTube work out of?
So Chad Hurley was one of the founders and the first chief executive. It was his garage. The three founders had met and had commercial and financial success from PayPal, their first company. And Chad Hurley was an early designer at PayPal. And the three of them were sort of kicking around an idea for a new business in his garage when they came up with YouTube.
Who else came out of PayPal besides Peter Thiel?
Famously, Elon Musk, who's now back in social media with Twitter. I mean, PayPal is, we talk about the term PayPal mafia. Reid Hoffman, who is the founder of LinkedIn, the founder of Yelp, it spawned this generation of, and to be clear, like men. It was the PayPal and a lot of these companies are like mostly dominated by male and have like few space for female leaders.
Go back to Chad Hurley, Jawed Karim, and Stephen Chen, the three founders of YouTube. How did they come together? What was their age at the time?
I believe Chad was the oldest at 28, and I think the other two were 27. They had met at PayPal. This was a time when it was, what we call Web 2.0, sort of beginning of this, not just where the internet was not just a passive experience that people would go on and say, like, read from a New York Times or a blog, or sorry, not just read from the New York Times or watch footage from mainstream media, but they could actually create their own. So MySpace was one. Facebook was started just months before. Flickr was a photo sharing app service that was started, and there were at the time there was a recognition that video was moving to the internet, but it was two things were not very clear. One was just how to do that technologically. It was kind of hard at the time to like process and upload video smoothly, and then there wasn't clear about what the business model was, but there was enough momentum and interest in amateur video kind of landing and making video sharing easy, and that's what YouTube clicked onto, right? They were the first company to make it very accessible and easy to use. That was a major part of their success.
Where are they now? What are they doing, the three?
Mostly enjoying their wealth.
How much they make?
Sorry?
How much did they make?
This came out in the Viacom lawsuit. That's the only reason we knew them. I think I believe, Chad Hurley and Steve Chen stayed around for the acquisition. Jawed Karim, who's the third founder, left pretty early on before Google acquired them. I think he made close to 60 million, and these are payouts, not just one lump sum. I think Chad and Steve are close to 300 million, is my understanding. Enough to, for many people, have a comfortable existence for the rest of their lives. Chad, they've all, Chad and Steve kind of started another video company. They've all been, I think all three of them are working as investors and mentors. Steve Chen worked for Google Ventures, which was Google's venture capital arm. The thing about all three of them are, they are certainly talented, and some kind of created this very important institution. But none of them, at least people I talked to, none of them have like these major egos, right? And they're not well known. They're not as well known as Mark Zuckerberg, obviously, or Jack Dorsey. And they haven't really been at the front of center of Silicon Valley, and maybe that's part of their personality. And perhaps they whether they just didn't find something else after YouTube that was kind of a one-hit wonder, or they prefer to play like the investor role.
Give us some idea of who's made a tremendous amount of money after putting video on YouTube. Besides, I assume, is there any figure on PewDiePie's how much money he's made?
There have been some estimates. I mean, in my reporting, I got some internal figures that was over, I think, a 7-year span, and it was, I believe, close to 30 million, or above 30 million. And so like PewDiePie has certainly made a successful business. I think you saw that clip. There are certainly people that argue it's very strange and bewildering that someone like him could have such a successful career. The flip side of that is the audience that he demands, like the number of people that watch his videos. It's kind of disproportionate to say that the salaries that a movie star can pull down. And so Mr. Beast is another one. Mr. Beast has certainly had a successful career. For a long time, the richest YouTuber was a child named Ryan Kaji, who I believe is now 10 years old. And he went from posting just videos of his family to creating a production studio that is worth over 30 million a year.
I got on this morning and looked at Ryan Kaji. Do you know any more about him and family and where they're located and why he struck a positive note with everybody?
I believe they may have just recently moved. I think they were in Houston and maybe moved to Hawaii. But they, like many successful YouTubers, don't love to broadcast where they live. I think it's understandable, especially young kids. There are many strange people out there, right? And so they want to keep as much as they can private life. So I say that, these are people that Ryan Kaji has been on YouTube since he was 3 years old. And so it's this weird dissonance between his parents saying that they want to respect his privacy and the fact that they basically more than 2/3 of his life has been lived on camera. He's part of now many dozens of very successful children on YouTube. He became famous with toy unboxing, which is a genre that came up about a decade ago, which is kind of exactly what it sounds like, right? The videos are often maybe 15 to 20 minutes long, and most of them are filled with him, unboxing or playing with toys. He's kind of graduated from that, and part of it's his age, part of it is the YouTube algorithm is starting to reward those types of videos less because of some scrutiny that the company has faced. Most people I talk to who have spent time around him and his family, his parents are young, I think they're younger than me, say that they're a well-adjusted family. I talked to one for the book. I talked to one of his managers, or kind of works with him in his parents' company, and the criticism is sort of familiar to everyone. What is it like to what life will this child have after they've been so famous so young? There's so many examples in Hollywood of that going wrong, and we've all seen the examples of stage parents and how that can have just like terrible pressures on a child's life. The response that the manager told me was that Ryan's never had to audition once in his life, right? That he, unlike in Hollywood, this is what YouTube prides itself on. There's no casting director, there's no producer, there's no director telling someone or a child that they're not good enough, right? There is just, they post a video online, it takes off or it doesn't.
I caught this sentence from you in your book. Older Americans probably visited YouTube rarely, certainly didn't rely on it for news. I'm an older American. I get on YouTube all the time. I find an enormous amount of history. How does that fit in all this, and how much is that watched? And I assume I'm in the minority, but I don't care what war you want to find out about or what person in history, there's something on YouTube like that, and I wonder how much business there is from that viewpoint.
Yeah, the great thing about YouTube is I can always be disproven whenever I make blanket claims. So, but I think, I mean, for certainly you're right. Like there is archival, there's enough archival footage about kind of any topic imaginable. And I also I'm a big jazz fan, and so you can go back and watch all these videos of jazz musicians playing, and sort of magical that they're there. I don't know from a business perspective. I think it's probably maybe a rounding error compared to like video games and beauty and kids, these like much bigger topics on YouTube, but it's still important. I think with that sentence and that context there was relative to Facebook, which is the sort of YouTube is often Facebook. They were started around the same time. They faced many of the same criticisms. However, Facebook has, I think you probably may agree, faced a lot more criticisms around its role in society, around misinformation, around sort of destructive social patterns and the type. And that part of that is because Facebook is much more prominent where where we see people having arguments and read like a lot of new, like actual media, contemporary like news comes on Facebook. People go to Facebook for that. Not in the same way that people certainly can watch CNN on YouTube and watch sort of major breaking news events, but Facebook and Twitter have been much more dominant as far as news consumption, and then they're much more associated with the problems of echo chambers and filter bubbles and all the sort of contemporary problems of social media. And to be honest, part of that is because Donald Trump did not use YouTube as much as he used Twitter and Facebook.
Back to what Susan Wojcicki said about being in Russia, I'm a little confused. I gather that YouTube took off RT, Radio Russia Today, but YouTube is still in Russia. And here's the odd thing. If you go on Google and ask for Russia Today, the entire channel comes up. So you can watch it on Google, but you can't watch it on YouTube. And Google owns YouTube. And YouTube is not allowed to be in China, where Google has done a lot of business. So fill in the blanks on all that.
Sure. Russia is an ongoing and fascinating story as far as I know. So Facebook is no longer operating in Russia. Netflix is no longer operating there. YouTube is as far as like the major sort of U.S. media platform still operating in Russia. And you saw Susan Wojcicki's, you heard her explanation for that from the Google perspective. They have pulled their advertising business there, so they're no longer making advertising, but they kept up their video platform. I have a couple theories sort of from my reporting and understanding. Part of that is YouTube is immensely popular in Russia. There is a Facebook competitor in Russia that has a bigger, sizable market share. There's a video service. There's no real comparable video service. And Russia, you have Russia Today and Sputnik, these channels that have become, until they were banned by YouTube, become very popular in and outside of Russia. You also have the opposition party has several popular channels, and so I think YouTube is accurate to say that they have been hosting videos and media that are critical of the state, and that role they play in other countries too. Where it goes from, it'll be really interesting to see where it goes from there. I think that for a while it was unclear how much of that was Google's decision versus how much of it is the Russian government's decision, right? If it's for YouTube to remain operating there, and how long they can continue to. I think there have been several reports about the Kremlin requesting that YouTube take down videos, and for China, just briefly. So Google pulled most of its services, including search and advertising, from China, mainland China, in 2010. YouTube never operated in China. I have some reporting in my book that they had plans to, but they never have. And by now, there's so many competitors to YouTube, including the Chinese version of TikTok, Douyin, that I don't. Even if YouTube went into China, I doubt it would have much of a foothold.
How many people work for YouTube?
That is a good question. I can't give you a definitive answer.
Go ahead.
My guess is it's north of 10,000.
And are they located? Any of them located around the world?
Yes, YouTube, like Google, has offices all around the world. Primarily, they're in their headquarters, and then in Europe. YouTube's biggest market by viewers is India, and they certainly have a lot of people investing a lot more in Southeast Asia.
In your book on page 121, you say starting in 2009, TV viewership began to slip, falling for a quarter or two and then dropping off a cliff. What caused that? And I assume what you mean by TV viewership, over-the-air television?
Yeah, we sort of like traditional linear television. I think there were a couple factors. One is YouTube, and the other is Netflix. Like, this was around the time that Netflix was really starting to take off, and I think that YouTube and sort of the streamers, Netflix and now Amazon Prime and Disney and all these sort of subscription streaming services, combined with YouTube, TikTok, are continue to eat into like the share of time that people spend on television.
What's the difference between YouTube and TikTok?
Well, there's the parent side. So TikTok is owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance. Then there's the product side, which is TikTok is, I think TikTok sort of, so it's a short form video. It's largely like under a minute. It is meant to be it's an app that is based on you flip through with your thumb, and you go through as many videos as possible, right? And you can kind of loop them. Some of them play in a loop if you want, or you flip on to the next one. YouTube has traditionally been, you watch a video, and then even on the mobile app, you have to kind of scroll down to click on the next one. Right, and YouTube since has responded to TikTok by introducing a feature they call Shorts, which is basically a TikTok copycat. And so it is short YouTube videos that are vertical like TikTok, as opposed to sort of the more of the traditional like horizontal screen. And you can flip through them just the same way as TikTok.
What was the hardest part for you in writing this book and researching?
So Google, like many tech companies, has strict non-disclosure agreements for its employees. They're not as secretive as Apple or Amazon, but their relationship with they tell their employees not to speak to journalists, and so often what happens is you kind of get the corporate story that is told through a particular lens and a narrative. And so I did my best to talk to over 100 current and former employees. I think the hardest part was getting people who currently were at YouTube to tell the real, honest truth about the company and its operations.
Have you gotten any feedback from YouTube since the book came out?
They haven't denied anything. There's been no official, so I'm pretty confident in my reporting. I gave them ample chance to come out and comment, which was all included in the book. I think there are certain parts of it that I don't love, but I like the feedback so far has been that it's honest and fair.
Couple of statistics. We wind this up. Male to female, what's the ratio of who views?
This is not public. As far as I understand in my reporting, it skews pretty heavily, and I don't have a percentage for you, but it skews heavily towards male.
How about what's the biggest number? I mean, I've seen a ton of numbers online and in your book, like 1 billion hours of content is watched across the world every day, 122 million active users daily. These are figures I've gotten in different places. Most YouTubers fall in the age group of 15 to 35. Help me out on all that.
Yeah, I think the number that I still struggle to wrap my head around is 500 hours of video are uploaded every minute. So that is like every 60-second new video footage, 500 hours. And this stat is a couple years stale. So at this point, it's probably more than 500 hours. So that's just the amount of sheer video footage that is added to YouTube every single minute and consistently, and that just gives you a sense about the scale and the operational complexity of something that we've never seen before.
One last couple questions on Chapter 9 called Nerd Fighters. You say not far away in downtown Los Angeles, Freddie Wong, the Guitar Hero star, began his YouTube glory days in an apartment with 3 other aspiring filmmakers. Who is Freddie Wong, and what's that story?
Freddie Wong was one of the earliest YouTubers, and I mean I have this tremendous amount of respect for him as a creative person, and like he was part of this generation that was YouTube early on started paying its creators, but from the onset there was no financial reward or guarantee. And so many people like Freddie, he was in college when YouTube came around and made these like really inventive short films that he started to upload on YouTube. He had this was not a guarantee, right? He wasn't doing it for money. He wasn't doing it to be an influencer. He wasn't even, I think he was doing it to create to pursue a creative act, to put something creative into the world, to like experiment with a canvas. And I told that story because I think that he's part of a generation and a type of YouTuber that too often the company ignored.
The title of your book is Like, Comment, Subscribe. How did you get to that point where you named it? Who named it?
My agent came up with that one. I can't take credit. It is. I mean, it's a great title. It's familiar enough to anyone who's watched enough YouTube that it is the mantra of a lot of YouTubers, that it is these sort of it's what they expect. It's a currency of social media, right? You and I are going on YouTube. We're not paying for anything, and so it's the expectation here is in like the demand that in order to achieve success on YouTube, in order to achieve fame, you need to get people to like, you need to get people to engage, you need to get people to subscribe. It's this sort of constant, I think it's almost desperation and need that the company set up. And I, it's almost, I meant it kind of, it resembles, like it's sort of endorphin. It sort of resembles a drug, right? It's something that social media has been compared to tobacco, and I think there's some definite truth to that comparison.
The subtitle of Like, Comment, and Subscribe there is Inside YouTube's Chaotic Rise to World Domination. Our guest has been Mark Bergen. We thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Booknotes Plus podcast. Please rate and review Booknotes Plus, and don't forget to follow so you never miss an episode. Questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at podcasts@c-span.org.